So firstly, good morning. Thank you. Thank you all for attending this morning. Great to see a couple of names that I recognise. So good morning to you, and a few people that I don't recognise. So also good morning. Let's get ourselves underway. So good morning. This is the Aged Care Act 2024. My name is Greg Bunt, and I am one of the principals and co-founders of Insicon Cyber. Today, I'm going to take you through the changes that were made according to the Act as they apply to cybersecurity and the Chapter 7 changes, and what boards need to know. Over the next sort of half an hour or so, I'll sort of unpack what that means, the areas that we believe you need to focus on, as well as areas that we can help you with, and some of the resources that are available broadly within the industry. So for those who don't know me, a little bit about myself, Greg Bunt, one of the founders of the Insicon cyber business. I've been in cybersecurity for more than 25 years, and I've seen it evolve from what it was all those years ago, which was more about protecting small amounts of data and small amounts of hacking, to massive attack surfaces, and a change in the way that people view cyber risk and governance. A lot of standards have moved forward since then, and the government has also kept up in many ways so that they can help provide guidance to organisations, as well as provide some standards and some minimums that they'll use to measure you guys against. A little bit about Insicon. This business has been running for over 15 years, started by my business partner and myself, together with sort of 60 or so years in cybersecurity. And we believe that cybersecurity should be used as a strategic advantage to your business. It's not just an opportunity to walk around and say no. It's about making sure that the data is safe, the people are safe, and the environment is safe. Overall, with that safe level of control and business, we help to protect your strategic assets and meet some of those risk objectives that you've defined in order for your business to be successful. And it's a great segue into the changes that came through as part of the Aged Care Act. One would say that they've been a few years coming. There was an incredible amount of industry participation and feedback. The government sort of took on board on top of the changes that were made to the Act from the previous one as an outcome of the Royal Commission, and that's allowed us to actually, everyone to actually have some time to digest what's needed and then move forward into, how we're going to deploy this, how we're going to make it actual, and going to make it real. So this morning, I'm going to talk around, a bit of the big picture. What's changed in the regulatory landscape, and then I'll sort of bring the case as to why why the board needs to care a little bit more than what they have in the past, what's important, and how this is no longer an IT challenge. This is a care challenge, and that risk around care has now enveloped all of the IT services, and other acts as well, and well as the landscape that we're sitting in. We do have not just the Aged Care Act, but you also have general governance and ASIC requirements around, making sure you keep data safe, notified data breach, the Privacy Act, the SOCI Act, the My Health Records Act. There's a lot of governance coming into play, and we want to just, let's see how we lay that out, and so that people can understand what their risks are and what their obligations are. So a bit of a recap here. I'm sure everybody on this call understands, if we go back to 2021, there were almost 150 recommendations out of that Royal Commission. Parliament spent, several years then digesting and understanding what those changes would be, and then it went live in November of last year. So that superseded the previous act from the late 90s. But it's underway. And what that really means for everyone on this call is it's now live. There is no grace period. The the expectation is that people understand what their obligations are, that they understand their statutory duties, and that they are familiar with and are addressing their obligations as they pertain to cyber and the other changes that were made inside the Act. It also means that out of that Act, there's been an extension of directors' liability onto key stakeholders, and that covers the board and executives within the business. So the Act is ready and running, it's in play, and it has been now since November of last year. So we're a good 6 months in. And it's important to understand that if we haven't started moving, that moving quickly is important here. So a bit of an update when the Minister got up and spoke at the Press Club about this in April, so a few months ago. He's continued to reaffirm the government's commitment to aged care, with some small changes around reducing things like private health insurance rebates, but the investment is in beds. It is an expanded home care. None of this is really a cyber announcement, right? There's no real new Chapter 7 obligations around what he announced. All of the changes that are needed and impactful were already introduced and went live in November of last year. So there's a lot of, he was reinforcing what's going on. And it's clear when we look at the Act itself and Chapter 7, is things like more beds, more home care, more data. The attack surface of your business has now expanded beyond the facility that you're in. And maybe that's just the one building or one aged care facility. The extension, by the nature of having home care and providing those services, is that your attack surface moved out of the building and is now extended as far as you have clients that you're supporting. There's also a fair amount of public and political oversight and scrutiny here. These obligations are here to stay. Given the government took 3 years to consider the legislation off the back of the Royal Commission, and that the previous Act was from the late 90s, it's expected that this will continue for and probably be amended and extended upon moving forward. So getting around your obligations is really, really important. And if we look at clinical care, there's a lot more data flowing through those systems than ever before, as organizations start to take their data and move it into third parties, as they move it into outsourced environments. That's obviously, your data now is moving to places that maybe you didn't expect it to be. Maybe it's moving offshore. Data sovereignty becomes important. There's a lot of actions happening out of the back of what was announced there. So for boards, it really is now a cyber issue. My engagement with many boards over the years is that they understand financial risk, they understand care risk, but IT risk was always something that was left to IT to deal with. It was never really dealt with as a, if you look at risk registers, the board generally didn't capture cyber risk at that level. They left that as an IT type issue. But now this needs to come through and be managed at that level. It's clear that the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission expects governing bodies to oversee technology and cyber risk, and not just audit events. This is not about being audited, say, on an annual basis. This is about continuous compliance and assurance obligations that need to be reported on and delivered on constantly. And so we need to be able to support the board to do that. We also need to make sure, as I said, when people are moving their data outside of their traditional on-premise systems and we're going through third-party vendors and extended supply chains, that we make sure that that data is kept safe, has as much data sovereignty as possible, and that we're aware not just that we've outsourced our data, but anyone that processes our data is required to be observed and managed as part of the Act. And the last part is cybersecurity is a condition of maintaining your provider registration. It's not, we haven't seen yet so many inspections by the Commissioner, but inevitably we'll see people inspected and potentially fined under this regime. Some of the consequences of failure, fairly straightforward. I think we can see that they're starting to treat cyber now, not just as I said, an IT issue, but it's a care issue. And because it is part of the care component, we are seeing the consequences of failure of that care matching for IT and cyber like it would for any other clinical care moment. So Chapter 7, where does information management fit, and what impact does that have broadly on us? One of the interesting things that we'll go back to is many of you, I think, went to the Healthcare Leadership Summit in the March or April timeframe. And we saw many, many vendors get up and present and industry experts talk. Very few of them spoke around obligations around information management. There was a lot of discussion around AI and how clinical care systems would be upgraded and become more efficient and would need less people to drive them. The challenge being no one truly addressed what was going on with the data that those systems would produce, how to be managed, and what were the expectations of the government, the healthcare provider sector, and the person under care. So Chapter 7 of the standard has been, I've broken it down here into these 4 or 5 parts. There's broken down into protected information, record keeping, information sharing, and whistleblowing protections. It's a very clearly written document. Having read Chapter 7 of the Aged Care Act, it's very clear on what the understandings are. The government has done a reasonable job of telling you what is needed, but as I step through the presentation, I'll talk around the parts where they have provided assistance so that you can actually meet some of those expectations as well. We've already touched around what the penalties are, so I'll steer clear of that. But it is very clear the protected information covers not just clinical data, but it covers everything effectively operationally defined under the Act about individuals and providers. Personal information is required to be protected for, solely for providing aged care. It's not meant to be used for other use cases. And you must take reasonable safety measures, security measures, ensuring that the data is safe. Big challenge here is you have a group of care workers who are using this information to provide clinical care every day. So you have a lot of that information is in action and moving around on a very frequent basis, and making sure that it's protected and cared for is really, really important because it is in use and it's on the floor and it's being used by all sorts of different types of workers inside your business. Third and fourth section then around information keeping and record sharing. You must provide, not just like you would for clinical data, you must provide complete and keep complete accurate for regulatory review. Your obligations extend beyond the contract, if you like. So whether that's you as a provider or your person under your care, your obligation for record keeping continues. One of the newer parts here is around cyber incident. You must keep logs around cyber and remediation must be well documented. Many organizations have incredibly clear and well-tested clinical events and they test them regularly as part of their BCP. It is evident in our interaction with aged care facilities that they have not done cyber-related incidents and they've not integrated that well into their BCP plan. Because if, for example, a clinical care system fails, what is the backup? And in many cases, that may be days or weeks away. And that's a challenge in supporting the care within the business, but also your obligations in the record keeping and information sharing section. Non-compliance of findings as well. So if there is a finding held against you, like many things in this industry, they'll be publicly searchable and publicly available, which means if you do have a breach, or if there is a public finding, you will be available to be searched upon, and people will form opinions of the services and care provided based around some of that record sharing and keeping. I've already touched on the penalties and enforcement. I guess the important thing here for people to understand is directors have always had obligations in every organisation, and they do have extended obligations in the aged care and health industry. That extends now not just to the care provided, but also said that information keeping, sharing, record keeping, disaster recovery, and cyber responses. And it's a very busy and hectic compliance system as well. Of course, we are all obligated under the Australian Privacy Act to behave and keep data in a way that is legislated. So all organisations are covered in that area. And then you'd be familiar with the My Health Records Act, things like notifiable data breaches. These are required if you are breached in a cyber way, and that's required to be submitted to the regulatory bodies. The interesting part about that is some of those notifiable data breaches, you don't have days or weeks to respond. You have hours. If you suspect a breach, you are required to contact the Privacy Commissioner and the Cybersecurity Safety Centre in Canberra and update them with what you see and what you think, even if it turns out not to be a breach. I guess that's the legislative side. On the practical framework side, how do they help? The government has defined many years ago what they termed the Essential 8 framework. That framework is a agreed baseline from the Australian Signals Directorate, and it outlines actions that could and should be taken by organisations to protect and provide a minimum baseline of security and compliance. They've broken it into 4 areas, 0 meaning obviously not compliant, and then 3 levels above, 1, 2, and 3. The expectation is that organisations in the aged care sector should achieve maturity level 1, which is the base level. It's the only level above 0. Sorry, first level above 0, and they're not expecting you to be a defence grade facility. What they're asking is that you demonstrate compliance to the framework and you act on the recommendations within that framework, that you do things like cyber incident reporting, that you inspect your third-party supply chain. It's been well documented in the cyberspace that many breaches occur in that third-party area. Just because you've outsourced your data processing obligations or requirements doesn't mean that you've outsourced your obligations to comply with the Act and the privacy components that sit around it. What the boards and execs need to do now, it is clear if you do not have a cyber governance regime in place that you need to enact one. Boards cannot outsource, if you like, compliance and governance solely to that function. They're required to receive reporting back. They need to empower the governance and compliance organisation like you would for care. You're required to do that for cyber now as well. You need to start off around assessing where you are as well. The majority of organisations, when it comes to posture assessment, I would say are at 0. Maybe they're at 1. The majority that we've viewed so far certainly seem to be at the 0 level, which means they are not compliant with the obligations under the Act, or the guidance at least that's provided under the Act, and should very quickly understand that posture and move to build a resilient framework that brings them up to the required maturity level. I've already touched on third-party risk. It's clear that as we look to outsource and data moves through SaaS platforms and other systems it is clear that managing the continuous obligations required will be an increasing burden, and yet it's an area that's not incredibly well understood. So, for example, in the contract, it may outline what are the requirements during the processing, but what happens at the end of the contract? How do you, if you are required to retain data beyond the contract, if you because you do have people under care still, or they were previously under care, how do you extract that information out of that system? How do you keep it? How do you maintain it? And how do you ensure that it's secure? Point 4 is around an incident response plan. Testing one, doing one is critical in ensuring that you understand and you have the muscle memory ready for when you do have an incident. As I mentioned earlier, it's clear that clinical disaster recovery and business continuity tests are undertaken. We know whether that's a COVID-related, some sort of outbreak or other issues, they're done very well. Cyber is not something that we've seen done at all in much of this space, and that's not unique to the aged care sector. There are many sectors that have just not considered their exposure in the cyberspace up until now. Training the workforce is incredibly important. If you are expecting people to behave in a particular way, then you need to train them on that approach. We see, especially in aged care and health sector broadly, many overseas workers are brought in and are used inside the industry to supplement and support what is needed. They also need to be trained on what are their obligations, not just around OH&S and other clinical processes, but also what's required of them under the Aged Care Act as it comes to cybersecurity, what they can and can't use systems for example, also needed. And then the final one here is around a whistleblower system. If you don't have one, then bringing a system in place where people can comfortably announce that there are issues, that they do want to flag certain considerations. They need to be able to do that in an anonymous way and supported so that we can see what issues are in place and then provide improvement processes, that continuous improvement for the system as it grows. It wouldn't be a presentation if we didn't talk around AI, but it is clear that AI is an important part of the aged care sector moving forward. At the Leadership Summit there in Darling Harbour 2 months ago, it was clear that many organisations are looking to improve the efficiencies of their systems, their processes, their policies by using the artificial intelligence, process augmentation, robotic processing agents, these types of things to actually improve the care and scale. We know that as the country ages, more people will need aged care. And so how do we scale to that? And how do we ensure that we keep their information safe? I want to touch on, when I did some research for this presentation, there's a robot that was it's called Paro, and it was invented in the 90s actually. So Paro is a therapeutic device in use, was invented in Japan. And whilst it was commercially delivered in the mid-2000s, that's about 20 or so years old, it's used as a therapeutic device for comfort for dementia care and supporting people with anxiety, etc. The original robotic device had very little clinical responses. It didn't. You could talk to it. It would respond to voice commands, etc. But it really didn't store any information. It really didn't make any. Really wasn't an IT device, really. But looking at the changes that have been made in this space, we see robotic humanoid type devices now being used, ones that are responsive to touch, feel, heat, those sorts of things are, more and more pervasive. And we've seen countries like China, for example, implement and create robots that have a constant feedback loop. We see therapeutic devices now in the sub $50 range. So the ability to take clinical measurements, heart rate, oxygen level, those sorts of things are delivered very, very cheaply. The question becomes, how do you ensure that that information is provided is either anonymized? Is it how's it stored? How do we ensure that we make sure that that data is safe and that it's not at risk of being compromised, and certainly not at risk of being sent overseas? That information, that health information, is incredibly useful. And as we look to scale the aged care industry to support the growing aging population, it's going to be critical that that information is kept safe and is maintained throughout its full life cycle. I guess AI is being, and you'd see this in your day-to-day, AI is being marketed as the solution to workforce shortages or the ability to do things faster. And all of those things may well be true, but certainly the more AI, the more data, the more two-way data, information moving to a system and then can process in some other places, is increasing rapidly. And we know that all industries are being impacted by AI, and it's the biggest risk surface that most organizations now have when it comes to cybersecurity. Again, AI brings new data obligations. Most of these things are SaaS powered, so they run in the cloud, so nothing on premise. The challenge being that the information being captured here is category 1 data, so it's health information directly from patients or people under care. Your obligations now are extended via that third party broadly out into the cloud, and understanding where that data is going to be critical in order to maintain the confidentiality of that particular platform. Again, I'd look at things like third-party supplier contracts. Have we looked at that in the last year? Do we understand what those obligations are? Many companies are switching on these AI-driven tools and systems without actually informing the data owner exactly what changes are being made. And that's critical if we need to understand what our ongoing obligations are. One thing that is important as well is introducing a data classification regime. There's 4 areas outlined here for very easy consumption. It's important to understand and classify this information. It's not a great approach. I've seen organizations trying to say, well, everything is confidential or restricted. It makes the use cases very hard. We need to be able to classify information well. And there's some suggested approaches here around what is restricted versus what is public. And auditing this information, ensuring that people who have access to clinical systems have the right level of security, that you would undertake a user access review. We see many organizations in aged care, the turnover of staff is quite high, and it is possible for certain applications to still be accessible by employees who are no longer with the organization. So making sure that we have reviewed that, need to be able to audit these systems as well, which is why making everything restricted is incredibly onerous. So good classification helps with our audit. I've already mentioned data residency and your obligations there. And of course, things like multi-factor authentication. I think we're all very familiar with MFA on banking applications, etc. That now needs to become more pervasive inside our internal systems as well. I did touch on the Essential 8 framework a bit earlier. It's very straightforward. It was introduced by the Australian government a number of years ago now, and it's broken down, as I said, into maturity levels. Obviously, the maturity level 3 is the highest and hardest level to achieve, and is not really necessary for organisations in the aged care space. we see many people say they want to go from 0 to 3. That's a very long journey to try and achieve, and you're better off doing it in certain steps. Fundamentally, it's broken down into 8 areas. The key ones being around software management, so point 2 and point 6, and then multi-factor authentication. Those 3, if we hit the nail on those really, really well, then we're off to a very, very good start. It's the areas that often are overlooked. Your requirements, for example, around patching applications, you need to be able to do that very quickly. So it's hours for patching applications now and operating systems. And being able to do that in an automated, auditable, scalable way is critical to be able to meet this Essential 8 framework. I did want to do a quick touch on a case study. So for everyone's benefit here, James Milson Village is an aged care facility in the Milsons Point, North Sydney area. We had an engagement with JMV, which started over a year and a half ago, knowing that they had some areas they wanted to address, and also that the Aged Care Act changes were coming. They were very quick to engage, and we undertook a number of different areas. The first one was a baseline gap or a risk assessment, and understood exactly areas of concern and how we could look to address that. We helped them build out their policy framework, and looking to the pathway. We know that achieving security uplift or any type of governance uplift takes time and certainly takes money. So getting into a budget cycle and then starting to look at how we do continuous improvement was critical to fitting this into the life cycle of the James Milson Village. They took on some managed services. They've decided that they were moving away from having on-premise style services provided by permanent full-time staff and moved to scalable 24/7 supported services outside of their infrastructure. That gave them heightened resiliency. It gave them scalability. It also meant that they were detaching some of the previously run processes internally and really start to leverage some of the cloud-based services while still working with organizations that understood that security is important and the obligations under the Aged Care Act. Fourth one was around tabletop. Having a board and executive that understand and have rehearsed particular exercises is critical if they're going to do that when should a real issue occur. That tabletop covered everything from ransomware payments, your obligations around what that means, your insurance, whose approach to follow, that guidance, communications, how do you speak to your customers, the people in care, their extended families, the government, all of those things. It's a very powerful half-day exercise to ready and prepare that business muscle for them to be ready should there be an issue. So overall, providing it's a very strong outcomes-based engagement with JMV that brings that level of maturity and monitoring that they couldn't perform internally at the budget and the scale that was required. So that brings us to the end of the session. I'd firstly like to thank everyone for their participation over the last sort of 35, 40 minutes. One of the things I would suggest is understanding where you sit and what your posture currently is critical to starting this journey. Make sure that you can use some of the free tools out there. You can reach back to people like myself. I'll be just dropping everyone a note in the next day or two around this presentation. This presentation will be available online, so you can play it back and provide it to people that may be in your organisation that are interested in understanding what the obligations are, and then making sure what's our posture, are we correct in doing it, and how does Essential 8 help me in getting my organisation to the level that's needed to provide continuous confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the platforms that service the aged care industry and my obligations underneath it. So I'd like to thank you all. As I wrap up this part, a couple of key takeaways. Know the data that you hold. Look towards building a framework that is practical. No one needs you to be a defence grade facility. You just need to be aware of what you do have and how you protect it. If you don't have an incident response plan, get one, practice it, and then make sure that you're ready to go. I'll leave it there. My name's Greg. It's been great to speak to you. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to reaching out to you soon.